Hello everyone, my name is Mason and I work for Comet Backup here in New Zealand. Welcome along to another Technical Highlights webinar. During these webinars I talk for about half an hour on some Comet topics. So there is a Comet webinar every fortnight. We alternate each fortnight. It will either be an introductory webinar for new users or a more in-depth one where I talk about new Comet features, best practice tips and IT industry news. You can sign up for notifications about when we go live. And I'm coming to you live today. It's 9 a.m. here in New Zealand. So if you're viewing this live on our webinar platform, then you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a chat widget. Feel free to pop in any questions that you have. They'll be sent privately to me. And at the end of the presentation, I'll have a few minutes to answer any questions. So anything that springs to mind, any clarifications, anything you want answered, just write it in and I'll do my best to answer it at the end. After the live presentation, this webinar may be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you're watching this on YouTube, obviously we can't take live questions, but feel free to submit questions anytime by the support ticket system, by email, or by booking in a phone call. So last time I was on, I talked about several changes that occurred during the 20.6 Voyager series up to that point in time. And there were quite a few new features to talk about. And I'll come back to this because this time today I have some quite big news to share that I think is going to take up most of the time we have allotted. We are aiming for a half-hour presentation only with some time at the end for answering questions. I know MSPs, you're all very busy people, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to catch up on the latest Comet news with me, so I won't waste any time. The big news is Comet's 20.8 Jupiter. At Comet, obviously, we have two release tracks, the quarterly long-term support versions, and then our latest weekly development branch, that's Voyager. And every 3 months, we'll roll up Voyager into a new long-term support release. And it's that time again, time for us to take everything that happened during 20.6 Voyager and produce this new long-term support release. And that's been our model for a while now, and we're sticking with it. It's got a lot of benefits. You know, if you need the latest and greatest, you can have it. And if you'd rather get long-term support for this non-moving target, then the quarterly releases are perfect for you. And we're happy to provide bug fixes and extended ticket support for those quarterly versions. Just to clarify what that means a little bit, we're obviously happy to provide support in the tickets by email and by phone call for your questions on pretty much any recent version. But if you are encountering a problem that needs a fix in the software itself, we only regularly base our software update patches upon these two branches, the latest quarterly and the latest Voyager, and you know, perhaps some of the previous quarterlies if there's ever a more serious issue. So it means that if you ever run into a problem with Comet that requires a software fix, you know, ideally you just get your issue fixed and nothing else changes. You know, you're a busy person, we'll do the other updates once we're not busy and all the fires are out, you know, never. But because we ship fixes only to the quarterly and the Voyager branches, in the event of you needing a fix, you'll experience less disruption if you are close to the current release. But it's your choice what version to run. You can upgrade as frequently or infrequently as you like. We keep all old software versions on our website, so you can download them indefinitely. But you know, there's no reason to. You should probably always use the latest quarterly release or perhaps the Voyager releases if you want to see the latest and greatest new features as we're developing them. Back on topic, Jupiter. So all of our quarterly releases are named after solar system objects. We started out releasing the first versions of Comet from the inner solar system with Mercury, Venus, and so on. And the metaphor is that we've been following the Voyager spacecraft further and further outward into the solar system. And you know, after a few years now, we're up to 20.8 Jupiter. Jupiter's the largest planet in the solar system. It's so big you can see it in the night sky without a telescope. Because it's so big, we've been hanging out in the asteroid belt and saving this code name for when something big happens in Comet. Something big has happened. There are several new features in this release. By my count, 16 new features and 21 enhancements. And headlining those features is, of course, you may have already heard about this, disk image support. Comet now supports taking bare metal image backups of your physical disks and partitions and restoring them again back to physical disks or to virtual machines or to the cloud. This is a pretty major milestone in the development of our product, and I will cover it in a bit more detail shortly. But that's not all. Comet 20.8 Jupiter also brings with it bootable USB recovery media support, major improvements to our translation coverage, default protected items and default schedules in the policy, and lots more from the 20.6 Voyager series that I covered in my last webinar. I'll go through these in a bit more detail. So just starting with some of the things from earlier on in the 20.6 Voyager cycle. In case you missed my last webinar, this will just be an abridged, shorter recap of some of the key points from last month. And if you're hopping from quarterly to quarterly then you'll get to see these cool new features for the first time. And this includes upgrades to the desktop app interface. You know, a lot of people get worried when you say that interface is changing, and I'm one of those people. So don't worry, these changes have got my thumbs up as a real improvement, and it comes in several different parts. First off, progress bars. So there's a brand new way to see the running jobs progress in Comet. It's much more easy to see what's running. The progress bars are properly saved. If you restart the app, it's much more visible on the left-hand side also to see whether each protected item is running or not. There's a new interface for selecting your protected item types. It's now a large frame instead of just the little drop-down. It makes it much more clear. Also, compared to the last preview of this during the 20.6 Voyager series, we've also hidden unavailable types on Mac OS. You know, a lot of our protected item types are actually Windows-only features. You know, if you look at the screenshots, Microsoft Exchange Server, Microsoft Hyper-V just doesn't exist on Mac OS. And it was kind of a bad look for your customers to have a lot of grayed-out options there, so we've hidden them. And they only show when you're on Windows. And of course, you as the MSP can see everything via the admin web interface. Something else new in the desktop interface is easily picking common paths. So when you go to create a files and folders protected item, it's now got 2 tabs. All of the normal advanced settings are still there on the custom tab, but by default, you're on this first include tab that just shows you some common things that users are likely to select. It includes desktop documents, downloads, music, picture. I'm not sure if you can read this from the screenshot. Videos, favorites, Outlook, and Windows Mail. And the Outlook and Windows Mail options are Windows specific, so your Mac and Linux users won't see them. And this is actually really nice in practice to use. And if you are the kind of MSP, I know we've got lots of different kinds of MSPs, but if you're the kind of MSP that just hands over the software to the end user, I'm sure they would appreciate this very much. Moving on, our SQL Server support has seen a few small enhancements. First of all, just tabs at the bottom here. Before, there were about 10 different fields and drop-downs, and it was much too complicated to cram into the bottom. So we've taken a cue from our other MySQL and MongoDB database boosters and just put in some tabs at the bottom here to make that more consistent. There's also a new OLEDB method selector that can help in the rare case of, mostly if you're using a 32-bit SQL Server on top of 64-bit Windows, and hopefully you're not in that situation, but if you are, now it's easy. Another new feature this quarter is the ability to restore as an archive file format. So when you go to restore files in the restore dialog, you can see on this final screen, choose compress archive from the drop-down. You can pick an output file, and there you go. A zip file will be created on the fly containing a compressed version of your selected files. And this is done in a streaming restore way, so there's no, you never need the full disk space locally. The available file formats are zip. Obviously, that's the most common format, especially on Windows, but it also supports tar and tar.gz for all the Linux users out there. This can be really useful in a few situations. One is perhaps if you're low on local disk space. The zip files will compress down a little bit. Or if there's a lot of small files, then it's really more efficient to deal with them as a, if you're restoring a lot of small files, it's more efficient to deal with them as a single large archive file. And one last interesting thing about this Restore as Archive feature is it also supports a 4th file format, which is SquashyFS. And what is a SquashyFS? It's kind of like a zip file that you can also mount as a virtual drive. That lets you restore as compressed, but still access the files inside. And it's really versatile in terms of being able to, use and work with large files such as virtual machine disk image, large database dumps, staying in compressed format and still being able to access the files like normal. But SquashyFS, it's a little bit rare and unusual, and probably it's mostly the Linux users that will benefit from this. Another new feature this quarter, limited admin accounts. So if you have multiple admin accounts, we're adding more additional granular restrictions on what you can let each of these admin accounts do. Now you can let a tenant change the branding, but not the storage, or vice versa. So this is one small part of a bigger project. We're working towards adding more settings here. That will eventually enable you to do some really cool things with multiple limited admins within a single Comet server. Embedded help web frame. So how this feature works is it loads a web page inside the app. All you have to do is set up the web address in the branding settings in your Comet server, and then this help tab appears on the left side here. And if you're really clever about how your web page looks using sort of the dark blue color, and then when you go to load it inside Comet, it looks like this really neat integrated help system for your customers. And maybe your help system's as simple as, here's our email address, here's our phone number. But because it's a web page, you can have rich experiences. You can have a form, a ticket system, videos, live chat directly inside the Comet Backup desktop app. So how about that? Videos and live chat inside your Comet desktop app. And now this isn't a new feature. Comet's had it since day one, but what is new is that because we're trying to keep Comet small and lightweight, we had to base it on the Internet Explorer engine. And everyone hates Internet Explorer for valid technical reasons, because it's hard to make a really rich, dynamic web experience that still works well in Internet Explorer. So the cool new change here this quarter is that it's now integrating with Edge, the new Chrome-based Edge, and everyone on Windows is getting this via Windows Update. So you'll be able to rely on this feature working really well with modern web experiences while still keeping Comet itself lightweight. And the last thing I premiered last month was the brand new real-time webhook API. So Comet Server has a comprehensive API. We use it ourselves to develop the Comet Server web interface. So anything you can do with the Comet Server web interface, you can do by the API. So that means it's possible, if you're a programmer or if you can hire a programmer, to automate any manual tasks, or you can extract data to get reporting or deeper insights. But that's not new. We've had the API for a long time. The conceptual model of the API is that you reach into the API and get the data out. What is brand new is a new feature that lets Comet Server push its data directly out to your system, your third-party system, using webhooks in real time. So it's JSON over HTTP, it's configurable, there's deliverability guarantees, there's event filtering, you can set them up dynamically on the fly. And maybe this doesn't mean much to you directly, but if you're a programmer, I'm sure your eyes will light up when you hear this. The important thing is that the stuff can become real time, so there's no more, waiting an hour for the data to refresh in your CRM. So those were the things I talked about last month. These all appeared during the 20.6 Voyager series and have been rolled up into our new 20.8 Jupiter long-term support release. So please check it out. And that was last month. What's new this month? Translation coverage. I'd like to talk about international language translations for a moment. We've got some cool news to share about this. So Comet Backup supports multiple languages, both for client and server. This graphic comes from the homepage of our website. Actually, we develop Comet in English, and then it gets translated into an additional 10 languages. So really, it's 11 languages total. A lot of software is only available in English, and maybe you can read English. You're listening to me talk in English, but that's you as an MSP. As for your customers, we've found it makes a huge difference in terms of what you as a service provider are putting in front of your customers if it's available in the local language. It's a real way to show that the service you're providing is really a local service run by a domestic company, especially in this age of GDPR, data sovereignty laws. So Comet today is available in English, of course, but also German, Spanish, French, Croatian, Hebrew, Italian, Dutch, Portuguese, both Brazilian and European, and also Russian. We used to only have one language, then we had two, and it's just grown and expanded over the years. But how do we get here? Mostly our staff only speak English, so unfortunately we have a hard time coming up with the translations ourselves. And if we can't do it ourselves, then the second choice is for our company to contract out for translations. And this works out pretty well. But in the past, we had some complaints because, the translation services don't necessarily understand a lot of the technical backup terminology, or the words are used with a different meaning, and they make some mistakes. And of course, because we only speak English, it's hard for us to proofread the translations and make sure they're correct. So it turns out the best quality translations come from you, the MSP service providers that have been using Comet. You know how it all works. If you speak another language, then let's work together to get Comet translated into your language and help you provide a more localized service to your customers. We're happy to talk about maybe funding a contractor if you've got a device commitment, or if you're able to put in the time yourself, then we gratefully accept community translations on our GitHub page. All you have to do to help out is just click the download link and see all the files, open them in Notepad, or a specialized translating program like Poeta. Make your changes and then send them back to us by the support ticket system or by email or through GitHub if you're a GitHub user. We love our international users, and together with you, we want to help make Comet the best possible backup application, no matter what language your users speak. So that's just background. None of that's new. That's all been the status quo for a while today. What I am announcing today is that as part of the 20.8 release, we are using contractors to get all of our 11 languages up to the full 100% coverage level. You can see here in the screenshot, this right-hand column full of hundreds, except Italian, which was a few days late for the release, but will be in the next point release. So 100% text coverage. This should be a dramatic improvement for some languages in the past where we had older translations sitting at 20 or 30% coverage. Even 20 or 30% coverage is still a colossal effort that we're really thankful for our great community for providing some of these. But those people are now going to see the entire app thousands and thousands of words, every job log message and every pop-up dialog becoming fully localized for your customers in your own language. But like I said, we're not really able to deeply validate this internally because our staff only speak English. So if you are an international language speaker, please try out the latest Comet 20.8 Jupyter and let us know if you see any errors in the text or any phrases that aren't translated, and we will work with you to fix them immediately. So some big changes there. Yet another new thing is default schedules in policy. What am I talking about here? So when you create a new protected item in Comet, you set up, first of all, what files or applications you want to back up, and there's a few more screens after that. One of those screens is the schedule screen, where you configure how often this backup job will run, and by default, the screen is just blank. You set up the backup job, maybe you run it once, never runs again. That's obviously bad, because when you come to restore, you won't have a recent backup job. So it's really important to set up a job schedule, whether that's hourly or daily or weekly, business hours, out of business hours, as long as you've got something. But by default, it's blank. That was a bad default. So now you can set up a default for your customers from the policy section of the web interface. So all you have to do is click this plus button here, and you'll see the usual schedule dialog. And if you do this, set one up, then the next time you go to create a protected item, you'll see the schedule section will be pre-filled with your default value. And this is just a default. It's not a forced setting. It doesn't force customers into having a certain schedule. The main problem is really customers with no schedule at all. If you want to find customers with no schedules on their protected item, the recent activity page shows up a no schedule badge that you can actually type into the filter section for. So default schedule seems like a really simple feature. Actually, it's been a little bit complicated for us to build because the schedule contains a lot of settings. And one of those settings in particular is that the schedule needs to point to what storage vault you want to back up to. You've got to pick something when you create the schedule. But we're talking about a policy option here that might be applied to, you take one policy and apply it to hundreds of Comet user accounts. So you can't really pick a single storage vault. It has to be some generic placeholder. And our solution for this is to do something that we're tentatively calling virtual storage vaults. So in the storage vault option, where normally you would pick out one of the storage vaults in the customer's account, this time you have to pick out one of the virtual placeholders. And there's three types of virtual placeholder: the latest storage vault, and then there's by type, and the last one is all storage vaults. If you pick a virtual placeholder, then it will get expanded out into the real storage vault when it gets used. So if you select all storage vaults, then when you go to create your protected item, it will have default schedules pointing to each of all of your storage vaults. And if you select SFTP, then when you go to create this protected item, it will have a default schedule pointing to any and all SFTP storage vaults and so on. And hopefully this is sufficient to catch those cases where the customer has a local path storage vault for their on-site hard drive and a separate cloud storage vault for their off-site backup, and you want different schedules for each of them. And of course, you're the service provider. You can always change your customer's schedules after the fact and use the recent activity page to audit through your customers to find protected items with no schedule. There is one last part to this. Normally a policy, like I said, you'd use one policy and apply it to many accounts, and you can't use any user-specific properties like this own storage vaults, except for the case if you set the user's policy to custom, because in that case the policy is not shared between accounts, and in that single specific case, then we do allow using user-specific properties. So if you do select custom for the user's policy, then you can pick the customer's own storage vaults directly in this dropdown. But in general, you have to use these virtual placeholders. Another new feature in 20.8 Jupyter in the policy settings is just up above this. That is the feature to create default protected items. So whenever a new device registers in the account, normally they just come up with no protected items, and you'd have to go through and select your first set of files or applications for backup. But now you can pre-configure some protected items, and when that new device registers in the account, your default protected items will get copied in and ready to go immediately. So this is particularly useful for silent installs. If you're deploying the Comet Backup app en masse to many, hundreds of customers silently in the background, then you can put all the accounts in the same policy and have them all automatically get your custom protected items straight away. And this takes effect for new devices. These are just the defaults for new devices when that device registers. There's no effect for existing devices. It's not an enforcement feature, and of course the whole feature is optional. But a little bit of enforcement is possible using these three checkboxes above the existing feature there. Maybe you want to set up some nice defaults, but allow the customer to go and delete and modify them, or maybe you want to prevent the customer from modifying. That's all possible too. Now, you recall from 30 seconds ago about the virtual storage vault placeholders. There's the same issue here with schedules. If how something's done in the policy, then it might apply to multiple user accounts, and therefore we can't choose user-specific settings in here. So when you add because this protected item type contains its own schedules, when you add a schedule for these default protected item types, we're in the same situation. So the schedule has to be a virtual placeholder storage vault, not any real storage vault in the customer's account. But of course, if the policy is set to custom just for this user account, then you can do it. Retention. A lot of the same problems apply to retention, because once again, with retention, you have to say the retention rules apply to the storage vault, and we don't have a storage vault list available. In this case, we just thought the existing settings are good enough. You can already set up the retention rules at the policy level, policy storage vault, whether that's enforcing, so on. There should be no need for a custom policy default protected item retention overrides in general, because it's a 7-word tongue twister, and really there's a simpler way to do it with the existing settings. So that's default protected items. Really flexible feature, really good for bulk deployments of the Comet app, really helpful for silent installs in large organizations, RMM integrators, people with specialized software would be interested in this feature. Maybe you've got a default SQL Server database on all PCs, so this works for any protected item type, not just file and folder. Speaking of different protected item types, I'm sure you're all very excited about this one, and that is our new disk image protected item type. So disk image has been our #1 feature request for over a year. When we first launched Comet, we did launch with the Windows System Backup protected item type that uses the Microsoft WB admin technology to take disk image backup. So we did have that feature checkbox, but our existing solution with WB admin had a lot of downsides. In particular, it needed temporary disk space for a spool image, and what we heard from our partner base was that was a pretty difficult requirement to meet in the field. So for over a year now, we've been working on our own native disk image technology behind the scenes, and we're happy to announce that this is publicly available in Comet 20.8 Jupiter and beyond. We've got some additional video content on this on our YouTube channel, in particular our launch webinar from yesterday, if you missed the live launch with Josh. And also my colleague Nicholas has created a fantastic video walkthrough of this new feature that I would really suggest checking out. And if you'd prefer to learn from text, then we also have comprehensive documentation and a brand new guide on our website. And I could talk about this at length. I will go into further detail today and over the coming webinars. But to cover the high-level points, it's a new protected item type. You just pick disk image from the protected item type selector. It's a booster. It comes with a $3 booster charge. You pick what disks and partitions you want to back up, or you can say all disks, and then just exclude things that you know you don't want. Just run the backup job like normal. Comet reads raw bytes off the disk and saves them into the storage vault in VMDK file format. And of course, with all Comet's usual amazing incremental chunking, compression, encryption, deduplication, and retention features. It skips over free disk space. So if you've got a 1 terabyte drive and you're only using a few gigs of it, then your backup size is going to be small. This works in most common situations like your basic NTFS starter partition, but also in rarer ones like exFAT and dynamic disks. In the extreme cases of foreign file systems, raw volumes, Comet isn't going to be able to tell what sectors are free, and it will have to back up the whole thing. But generally, Comet is very good at skipping over free unused space. There's an option at the bottom to turn this off if you want a forensic quality backup. That includes the unused sectors for undelete file recovery, things like that. Snapshot consistency, it's using VSS snapshots internally if possible and lock volume otherwise. So to make sure this backup job is absolutely safe, has point-in-time consistency. Once again, this is only possible on common volume types, but definitely all the common ones, NTFS, boot drives, all very well supported. And really broad format support. This works on MBR, it works on GPT, it works on NTFS, ReFS, exFAT, it works on very small, it works on very large drives over 4 terabytes, it works on regular hard drives, it works on advanced format 4K drives, it works on SSDs, works on dynamic disks, basic disks, storage spaces, it works on BitLocker, it works on online and offline volumes, it works on mounted VHDs, it works on Windows containers, it works on everything we've tried. When you go to restore, you have 2 options. Because the raw bytes from your disk have been saved in VMDK file format, one possibility is to just restore the VMDK files themselves and do something with them. For instance, we support booting the VMDK files inside a virtual machine platform or a cloud environment. So you can do physical to virtual machine uplifts, also known as lift and shift, where you take a physical PC, you back it up with Comet, and then restore those VMDK files into a cloud virtual machine. Or of course, for disaster recovery, maybe in a disaster, you want to be able to sell to your customers your new ability to boot up a customer's PC backup inside your virtual machine environment. And alternatively, if you just have these VMDK files restored, then you can mount them as an attached drive letter and copy files out. There's lots of programs out there to mount a VMDK file as a drive letter, or actually 7-zip can just open them and browse and extract files. That's really convenient. So that's one option for restoring, and the other possibility is to restore back to physical. So in this mode, you take the backed up disks and partitions and image them right back over your physical drives. So this is useful for disaster recovery rollback scenarios. If something's gone wrong, you need to re-image the PC from an old backup, or perhaps you're cloning a PC, or perhaps you've lost a PC and you're restoring an old PC's image to a brand new PC. So many possibilities here. When you restore back to a physical disk, there are some special cases to be aware of. The first one I want to draw special attention to is how Windows actually boots up. In the case of an MBR drive, you've got partition table, an active partition set, you've got your system reserved partition that contains NTLDR, the BCD, and only then does it get onto your C drive. So there's actually 2 or 3 other boot partitions and boot areas that are needed for Windows to boot. Likewise, if your PC uses UEFI, then you've got your GPT partition table, marks out the EFI ESP, that contains the EFI binary version of NTLDR and the BCD that points to where your C drive is. If you've backed up a whole PC, you really want to make sure that you back up all of these little extra partitions. And you can see them here in the screenshot. There's an EFI ESP, a recovery, and a raw byte range at the start of the disk that contains the partition layout table. And when you go to restore, just restore them all. Comet has backed them up byte for byte, and that's exactly what Windows needs to boot up. If you back up just the C drive partition, then you'll have all the data, but Windows is not necessarily going to be able to boot from just the C drive partition. It is possible you'll just have to manually repartition your drive and fix up the bootloader using the Windows recovery environment, which is possible, not too difficult. But in a stressful restore situation, it's just nice to have everything ready to go. And these other byte ranges are pretty small, so I would just recommend backing them up always. The second thing I want to draw attention to is that while Windows is running, you're not able to overwrite your C drive because Windows is currently running from it. Comet can only overwrite a partition that's not in use during a restore. So how can you possibly stop using Windows while still using Comet? How can you detach yourself from the running operating system? And we do have an answer to that. And the answer is you need to boot from some other disk. And it doesn't really matter how you do that. And as long as you're not booted from the disk you're trying to overwrite, any method is fine. For instance, if you have Dell or HP or Lenovo hardware, often they'll come with their own special recovery disks or recovery USB drives that have custom drivers pre-configured. If you're a Linux user, you may be familiar with Linux boot from USB. You can also use the built-in Windows tools to make a recovery environment. It doesn't really matter as long as your PC ends up being able to unmount that root drive so Comet can overwrite it during the restore. But to make things easy, we've added a built-in wizard for creating USB recovery media within Comet itself. So inside Comet, it used to say Account here on the left. We've renamed it to Settings, which I think is a nice small improvement. So just click Settings on the left, and then you'll see the USB recovery media option on the right-hand column. And if you click that, you'll see this pop-up appear. So this pop-up, first of all, scans your PC to see what's available. Right now we have 2 methods available, one based on WinRE, that's our default, and one based on Windows to go. The reason there's 2 of them is because we're really quite proud of Comet's small, lightweight install size. Comet's installer can be 10 megs or less, depending. In order to achieve the small install size, one of the things we do is try and rely on what's already on the PC instead of shipping our own copy of things. So we don't ship the 3 gigabyte W80K or the ginormous PE generation toolset because we want to keep Comet lightweight, and we simply don't have the install size budget for crazy large things like that. So we scan the PC, and if WinRE is available, then Comet can make use of it. And if Windows to go is available, then Comet can make use of it. And you'll see this grow in the future. We'll definitely be able to add that 3 gigabyte W80K as an optional download in the future. But realistically, Windows to go is available almost everywhere. It is really interesting to see what is and isn't available on different PCs. We've seen WinRE is missing on some really small disk size Windows VMs, but in that case, you're more likely to create the USB media on a real, desktop or laptop where this thing is very likely to exist. And likewise, unfortunately, Windows to Go is missing from everywhere after the latest Windows 10 2004 upgrade. It turns out that it's too hard to do Windows updates on a booted USB hard drive, and that wasn't a risk Microsoft were willing to take on an ongoing basis. So Windows to Go has just been removed for everyone. It's still there in Windows 8.1, and it's still there in Windows Server 2016 and 2019, but it'll probably disappear from the next version of Windows Server 2. In terms of which one you should pick, Windows RE is for USB flash drives, and Windows to Go is for USB hard drives. Windows RE is more lightweight. It boots straight into a mini Windows, straight into a pre-installed Comet that's preserved all your custom branding, but there's not much else there, whereas Windows to Go gives you a full Windows environment that lets you, run Explorer and move files around and so forth. But like I said, Windows to Go is being phased out by Microsoft, so this is going to be a non-choice fairly soon. So we've talked a lot about brand new features in Comet. To help you bring new partners on board with these new features, disk image and everything, we've completed another of your feature requests with the ability to offer a free trial to new customers. Now, Comet has always supported free trials for you MSPs yourself. We offer a 30-day trial for all MSPs, nearly unlimited usage, well, $100, which is sufficient to get 50 devices on board. You're usually impressed if you can pull that off within a month. But in terms of MSPs offering free trials to your own customers, we haven't really supported anything like that. You can obviously do it if you want, but you just have to eat the cost. What's new here is that we are now eating the cost of that. So as of Monday, the 24th of August, 2020, if you have an account that you're trialing, if you're genuinely trying out the software to see if it's a good fit, we want you to be able to do this with the confidence that, if it's not a good fit for whatever reason, you're not out of pocket. To be more specific, we will just refund the account if it's deleted within 14 days. So you can use this to offer 14-day free trials if you're careful to delete on time, but actually it's even better than that because it's automatic across your entire customer base. You don't have to specifically sign someone up as a trial. It's just, if it's not a good fit within 14 days, then delete the account and get your money back. Simple. You may want to keep track of which of your accounts are still within the trial period. You can check this on the Comet server itself by looking at the created time field, or from your billing account dashboard on cometbackup.com, where all the license and billing information comes together. In particular, there's a new widget that shows your upcoming refunds, and then you can click through for more detail, see a breakdown of all the trial statuses. So free trials, it's a fantastic new ability. It means you can go out and sell backup service and know with confidence that if it's not a good fit, then 14 days, delete the account, doesn't cost you anything. But of course, we do expect Comet to be a good fit in almost all cases because we are constantly improving Comet to create the world's best backup software. And I believe I mentioned the idea for free trials came from our feature request system. Did you know we have a public feature voting page where we talk about upcoming features? You can create a new request or upvote any existing one. Almost all the features we've added recently, or at least well over half of them, the ideas came from customer requests. Your requests, we really appreciate all the feedback. We listen to our MSPs, and if you're crying out for a feature, we're here to help. Tell us what you need, and we'll work on adding it. We look at the system often, and all the votes and comments really do help guide our development priorities. And it's great to see, you raise a feature request, other people chime in and say they want this too. You get a notification immediately when the feature is ready or when there's any news about it. When I checked it today, we were up to 77 completed requests. We really do get around to developing them, maybe not straight away, but we are making some seriously good progress through the list. So if you've got some new ideas for Comet that could make your life easier, come on in, add some feature requests, make your voice heard on the existing ones. Actually, since Comet has started to become more and more popular over recent years, we're seeing higher vote counts, increased number of comments, more engagement on this platform. And so in some ways, this is becoming a quite nice place to chat with other Comet partners in the community and talk about upcoming features with other MSPs. Because it turns out most MSPs who use Comet in their day-to-day operations end up having a lot in common about, what are the pain points, what would be valuable to improve the product. So we really appreciate hearing from your experiences. Last thing I want to quickly cover today before we finish, last but not least, we've recently released a Ruby language SDK for the Comet Server API. So Comet Server has a fully comprehensive API. Anything that you can do with a web interface can be fully automated via the API. And if you're a Ruby programmer, or if you can hire a Ruby programmer, it's now easier than ever to get started with the Comet Server API by using our gem Just add the gem to bundler and follow the steps. It's open source on GitHub, and you're welcome to use this in any Ruby project, either free or commercial. It has full coverage of the Comet Server API service, all our data types, class structures, constant definitions, API method endpoints, all with full documentation included in the doc comments, all type hinted with Yard, so you know it will be easy to use from an IDE. And it's fully up to date with the latest API features from Comet 20.8 Jupyter, including disk image and webhooks. And it joins our existing PHP SDK. And more programming languages to come in terms of full SDKs. But of course, our API is just JSON over HTTP, and it's fully openly documented on our website, including examples for PowerShell, Python, and many more besides. So if you're a programmer, or if you can hire a programmer, there's nothing stopping you getting started to automate Comet further.